So good morning, everyone. I'm Charlotte Picasso from the company Jira Food based in France. So Jira is a marketing market research companies. We are doing market research and strategy consultancy for food in the food sectors, and more especially in the dairy sectors, meat sectors, bakery, and food service sectors. Concerning me, I'm in the company for almost 2 years, and I'm a business analyst working on several projects, including dairy project, and I'm also slightly specializing on sustainability topics. And that's why I'm going to talk to you about sustainability today, and more precisely sustainability in the dairy sectors. So we're going to start with the presentation. So yes, it is evident that sustainability is really a very important topic today for the whole industry, and this is a topic which really is making some big modification for the dairy sectors, and we are facing now a dairy sectors which is facing important changes because of this trend. And now you have more and more consumers which are more and more numerous to take into account sustainability when trying to choose a food company or food product. Uh, so you have the example of some criteria food choices, because when deciding to buy a food product, consumers are taking into account several criteria. You have historical criteria like the food safety, the taste, the pleasure, which are considered now as historical criteria and are now considered as the new normal. But for several years now, you have additional criteria which are really of growing interest and which are starting to appear more and more in the consumer mind. It's, for example, the origin of ingredients, the nutritional quality of products, the clean label trend, and also, of course, the sustainability trend. And you have more and more consumers which are declaring that they are willing to pay extra price for sustainable products, for sustainable food and sustainable goods. But it's really important to note that in reality, you have a much smaller proportion of consumers which actually will really pay an extra price. And it is because price is really the driving criteria for food choices, and food price, sorry, is and will remain the major driving factors for food choice. But even if the price will lead the priority, the sustainability trends really can't be ignored. And dairy companies really have no other choice but to taking into account when developing and manufacturing new products. So to illustrate this trend, here you have the example of Yuka. Yuka, which is an online free application, which is available already for several years. Initially, it has been developed to evaluate the nutritional quality of products, but since beginning of February, now you have the possibility to evaluate the eco score of food products. And it is something which is very, very important because it is taking into account the product, the entire product life cycle of food products. And also it really has the power to really influence consumer food choice, because first, it is very used by an increasing numbers of consumers. And secondly, for example, if you scan a product with a bad eco score, the application is going to propose you an alternative product with a better eco score. So it really has the power to influence consumer choice and then the future of the developments of future products. So really, this really showing that the sustainability trend is of growing interest, and dairy companies, that's why they have started to implement action to take into account sustainability in the supply chain. And for them, for dairy companies, sustainability mainly pass by improving their emission management and the reduction of the emissions. So you have more and more dairy companies which are taking commitments to reach carbon neutrality, or at least to reduce carbon emissions and emission in general. And for them, it passes by three types of actions. First, you have actions to manage emissions in factory, but it's something which is already done for several years by dairy company because it was the easiest way to work on it. Second point, it was management of feed and farm system optimization. As the first one, it's already present for several years in the dairy sectors. And the last one, the last possibilities is to manage cow emissions. And actually, it is where all efforts are focused on. And you have several studies, several tests which are in the progress to try to reduce as much as possible cow emissions, and more particularly methane emissions. So just few examples. It's a non-exhaustive list of some research which are under progress. You have some research which are made to develop several feed additives. You have one of the most famous one, maybe you already know it. It has been created by DSM. The name is Bovaer. And it is a molecule that suppress the enzyme that trigger methanes. And studies are suggesting that this feed additive has the potential to reduce methane emissions by about 30%. So it's very, very important. Actually, it is a feed additive which is not available on market. It is waiting for the European approval, but we could expect Bovaer to be available on the markets during the year, probably. You have also other studies on feed additives around algae, around garlic, which are very promising. You have works also on methanogen inhibitors to inhibit methane productions. Animal welfare program to reduce the stress of animals, because there is more and more link between animal welfare and the level of emissions. They're putting in place also selective breeding with selections of low methane animals. And finally, also several research which is done on methanogen vaccines, which are acting thanks to some antibodies which are attacking methanogen bacteria to reduce the emissions of methanes. So all these technologies are still under research, and really has the potential to significantly decrease cow emissions. And it will obviously help dairy farmers and dairy companies to improve their carbon footprint and so their sustainability image. So on this slide, you have, like previous one, a non-exhaustive list of some major dairy companies, and you have the example of some climate change commitments that they have taken, and more particularly commitments around carbon emission reduction and carbon neutrality. And you could see that really it is a topic which is on everyone's lips. But you can see that you have several levels of commitments. The first one is that for less advanced company, you have at least official emission monitoring measures to concretely measure the level of emissions. The second step is to have carbon reduction commitments, like for example, it's the case for EMI or for Sodial. And last level, it's to have a carbon neutrality program and carbon neutrality commitments with several deadlines, like it is the case for Nestle, for Danone, for DFAs, and for several other dairy companies. So really, you see that dairy companies are taking this subject into account with, of course, different level of progress, but it is really a key focus, and it is really in response of growing interest of all the actors of the supply chain, and especially from consumers, because as I told you previously, now you have consumers which are looking for good, healthy, sustainable product, but also at a coherent price. So until now, sustainability for consumer, a sustainable product for consumers, it was mainly, in most cases, an organic product, because the organic label was really considered as a proof of quality and a proof that the producer was taking into account the environment. And it's very notable that the organic dairy markets really considerably developed in the past years. But actually, we are starting to see that the organic label is not always now the central definition of a sustainable product. You have a lot of additional claims which are appearing. On this slide, you just have few ones, the main ones, but of course there are other claims which are started slowly to compete with the traditional organic claims. It is the case, for example, of the developments of the nutritional quality, but also the localism and the origin certified trend, which are really of growing interest, and especially since the beginning of the COVID crisis. You have a preoccupation around packaging reductions, and also, which is a growing topic that I will talk just after, is the topic about animal welfare, which is really, really of growing interest. So here on this slide, just to talk a little more about the organic, here you have the example of France, and you have here the retail sales for organic dairy products in France between 2016 and until March 2021. And you can see on this graph that in previous years, organic dairy products really experiment a very, very strong growth. But in 2020, the growth really slowed down or declined, especially for these three product categories. And it is mainly due to the economic uncertainties for consumers as a direct consequence of the COVID, because during most of the crisis, and especially during the first part of 2020, panic was really the common behaviors for most consumers when doing retail shopping, and consumer really backed to basic and organic momentarily put aside. So the key question for us now is really to know if we reach just a step because of the COVID, and that the market will regain growth in the coming months, in the coming years, or if we reach like a selling regarding organic. And that's a key question, because you have several dairy companies, including, for example, Sodial, Agrial, which have taken the decision to stop conversion of organic farmers. They have taken this decision in beginning 2021, and it's going probably to last until the end of the years. So, because according to them, the demand was not as high as expected. So we could really see, but of course here is the case of France, but we are starting to see that the organic label is starting to is like the new normal for the consumers, and this label really needs to integrate new value, added value, and to implement all the claims to start to be attractive again for consumers. So, as I told you before, in addition to the organic label, classical, if I can say that, organic label, you have the animal trend, which is really, really developing in European countries, but also all around the world. The animal label trend was initially a trend appearing for meat production, because there was increasing preoccupation regarding the slaughtering of animals. But it is a trend which is slowly appearing more and more in the dairy sectors. Actually, in Europe, there is no mandatory regulation concerning animal welfare, but we could expect some changes. And you have an increasing numbers of the volunteer-based initiative and private initiative. And here you have the example of Italy. Italy, so they have created in April several non-governmental organizations have created in April 2021 a new animal welfare label for dairy cow. So it is a label which is taking into account and trying to evaluate the quality of life of cow, and trying to evaluate their potential to express their natural behaviors. And at the end of the classification, it is going to classify the dairy cows in 6 different categories. The better one is the classification 0 for organic production, which corresponds to farms which are following the European organic legislation. Then you have several levels, with the worst one, which is the level 5, which corresponds to intensive farming, with no particular measures regarding animal welfare. So actually, these types of label is private, and it is volunteer based, but regulation is slowly evolving, and we could expect some official regulation maybe in the coming months or in the coming years. For example, with the European Commission, which is going to launch its Green Deal in the coming months, and the European Commission is has committed to revising its animal welfare legislation in its farm to focus strategy, and also as part of its biodiversity strategy. So it is really obvious that we are facing in Europe, but also in all countries around the world, a movement toward quality for dairy productions, with the implementation of new labels, new certification, new proof, in order to create quality and added value instead of quantity. And this is something which is going to lead to two major things. The first one is that in the coming years, we are expecting a lower growing volumes for milk collections. In the past decades, milk collection growth reached plus 1.7% per annual. And in the coming 5 years, by 2025, we expect milk collection growth which only plus 0.9% per annual in the EU 27. The second thing is that it's probably going to continue the trend of declining the number of dairy farms and increasing the size of dairy farms, because the implementation of all these claims, all this certification will make that only big farms will have the financial potential and financial means to implement these actions on their farms. And all these actions will obviously lead to higher quality standards for milk and for dairy products, but it will also lead to higher prices, and it risks to, at least at the first step, to limit a little the competitiveness of the dairy sectors with lower margin. So just to make a little aside, of course, I could not talk about sustainability without talking about dairy alternatives and about plant-based, because these products, as you know, are more and more competing with traditional dairy products, with a communication based on the fact that they are greener than traditional dairy products. And this is a market which is really growing very rapidly. Some studies suggest that the market is about to grow by more than 16% per annual by 2025. So it's a very impressive growth, mainly for the dairy-free fresh category and cheese category, and with main innovation on the clean label trend and on the natural functionality of this product. And despite the strong developments, we are starting to see that plant-based products are also their limits, and are starting also to be questioned on their real sustainability. And you have more and more experts, more and more consumers, which are starting to ask that, is plant-based, is dairy alternative really the sustainable solutions for the future of the sectors? So that's the key question, and that's still without answer, but starting to be investigated for now. So to conclude this presentation, there is really no doubt that the sustainability trend is really of growing interest for consumers, and it will really remain in the future. But now the challenge for dairy companies and for the industry will be to be able to bring proof to consumers. And bring proof will obviously pass by the ability to measure emissions, to measure impact, and to measure the action and the impacts of the corrective measures that are implemented. And this, it will be very necessary because, and once again, it is especially true since the beginning of the COVID, there is more and more scrutiny over the entire dairy supply chain. And for example, greenwashing will be more and more prevented, more and more scrutinized to force dairy companies to go in the good direction. And on that way, there is a chance that legislation will act as a driver and will act and will force even more the dairy companies and the industry to go in the direction of sustainable productions. At consumer level now, the organic label probably have still a bright future, but at the conditions that it reinvents a little itself with adding more claims, for example, with the developments of the local productions, animal welfare certification, and also more generally implementation of carbon neutrality certification, or at least emission reduction program. And on the same trend as dairy products, there is no doubt also that dairy alternatives and plant-based will be questioned on their real sustainability impact. So just a last sentence and I will finish about that. What is very important to note, and this is probably going to be the real key challenge for dairy companies in the futures, is that the implementation of all these claims, all this regulation, all this certification and so on, it will obviously lead to higher production costs for the dairy industry. And in reality, you have only few consumers which are willing to pay extra price for quality, because price will remain really the major buying factors for consumers. And that's why the industry really maybe risk to face some margin pressure. And the key challenge for them will be to manage to mitigate that issue. Yeah, so thank you for your attention, and do not hesitate if you have any question to ask. Thank you.